Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
On Sunday, the Washington Post editor went on one of the Sunday news shows and accused Infowars and Donald Trump of inciting incursions into other countries, among other things. Today, we see that, of course, it's the global establishment, the Washington Post, Obama, NATO, who are inciting incursions. Here's the latest example of this. And every day, we get another example from the global establishment. Today, the United States sent special forces to the border of Russia as NATO is poised to strike back at Vladimir Putin's, as they call it, aggression. This is from the Sun in the UK. They say that Obama has deployed U.S. Special Forces troops along Lithuania's border with Russia, and they are the ones who are aggressive. Now, what is this in response to? They say there are reports that Putin is deploying nuke-ready missiles. Let me focus on this. They're nuke-ready. They're not nuclear missiles, but they are nuke-ready missiles. And so our response is to put special forces there to counteract these nuclear missiles. I don't know exactly what they're going to do. Are they going to go across the border, destroy these missiles in an act of passivity? They say the Lithuanian Defense Ministry, and of course, this is what we all thought was going to be the first fight, and that is between Trump and an aggressive, provocative NATO. I think it may well be the first fight against the globalists may be the United Nations. We'll talk about that later. But the Lithuanian Defense Ministry spokesperson said that America has offered additional military support following Russia's annexation of Crimea. Now, let's focus on that. Russia's annexation of Crimea. They said the U.S. was the first one to offer additional safety measures to Baltic countries following Russia's annexation of Crimea. Do you understand that Crimea has been a part of Russia since 1783? To put that into perspective for those of you whose American history is limited to Hamilton, it was 1789 that the U.S. ratified its constitution. So in 1783, Crimea became part of the Russian Empire. They took it from the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. It was under Catherine the Great, and it's been part of Russia's influence ever since. But to speak of the annexation of Crimea, understand what happened here. They had the Ukraine seceded from the Russian Federation, and then the Crimea said, no, we would like to remain in the Russian Federation. To put that into another example of American history, at the time of the Civil War, as Virginia seceded from the Union, West Virginia said, we want to remain in the Union. That's the analogy. Nobody ever talked about the federal government annexing West Virginia. That's the way they're provocatively painting this. And as I said, every day we see another provocation from the globalists trying to escalate things. Now, there was an interesting article also on the Drudge Report today from Glenn Greenwald, still talking about the Washington Post and their fake news. And he pointed out the Washington Post has been richly rewarded for their false news narratives about Russia and the threat from Russia while the public is deceived. He said in the past 6 weeks, the Washington Post has published 2 blockbuster stories about the Russian threat that went viral. One on how Russia was behind a massive explosion of fake news. The other on how it invaded the U.S. electrical grid. Both articles were fundamentally false. Each now bears a humiliating editor's note, grudgingly acknowledging that the core claims of the story were fiction. The first note was posted a full 2 weeks later at the top of the original article, but the one about hacking the electrical grid was buried the following day at the bottom of the article. And then he goes on to talk about one of the other executive editors of the Washington Post, not the guy who accused Infowars of inciting incursions. You know, Infowars has fought back against the globalist incursions like the one they tried to pull in Syria in 2013. Nevertheless, this editor, Marty Barron, boasted about how profitable the paper had become. And he goes on to say that even though he tweeted out and got a couple of thousand retweets on the first article about Russia creating fake news, he never pulled that back with a tweet. And so he goes on to question, he says, what is the motive of the Washington Post in publishing these kinds of false stories about Russia? He says, was it ideological and political, namely devotion to the DC agenda of elevating Russia into a grave threat to U.S. security? Or was it to please its audience, knowing that its readers, in the wake of Trump's victory, want to be fed stories about Russian treachery? Was it a source servitude? I think this is a key thing right here. I think these last two are the real issue. Source servitude, proving that the Washington Post will serve as a loyal and uncritical repository for any propaganda intelligence officials want disseminated. That is the way the mainstream media has always operated, as a reliable servitude, pushing out the government's official story. And if you criticize that, you're immediately accused of being a conspiracy theorist, because it's true if the government says it. It's true if the Washington Post or the New York Times or somebody who is part of the establishment pushes it out there. But then he goes on to also point out, of course, they have a profit motive as well. So they put out these sensationalistic clickbait headlines like the electrical grid has been hacked, even though it was a virus on a laptop that wasn't even connected to the electrical grid in a remote Vermont utility. And then we find out there wasn't even a virus on the laptop. So the whole thing disintegrated. And remember yesterday we talked about on the nightly news how we had seen with these revelations from John Kerry that we had various members of the CIA and the political establishment, even Republicans, especially Republicans like John McCain and McMullen, who was trying to deny electoral votes for Trump in Utah, meeting with ISIS. And as we learned from these transcripts, the key thing that Kerry was talking about was how they wanted regime change. They didn't care who was injured in this. They didn't care what happened. They simply wanted regime change, even if it meant escalating Al-Qaeda or ISIS, whatever you want to call them, into a much more powerful position. They still wanted that regime change. And so we're reminded by RT, they have a quote from a defense ministry spokesman in Russia. He says, it's miraculous that only oil fields captured by ISIS, allowing the militants to earn tens of millions of dollars every month on illegal oil sales and recruit mercenaries from all over the world, only those oil fields miraculously did not come under any U.S. bombardment. And they point out that CIA Director John Brennan has said that Russia is using a scorched earth policy in Syria. Well, I would ask, who lit the fire? We saw yesterday when we looked at John Kerry's off-the-record discussion that is now going on the record. We found out that the people who were lighting the fire were Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry. And they don't care who gets burned. They don't care about the children who are destroyed. They're just as Madeleine Albright didn't care about the 500,000 children that died from their sanctions in Iraq. When she was asked that, she said, yeah, it was worth it. She didn't even deny that that many kids had died. And so when we see the heart-wrenching pictures of people who are suffering civilian casualties, let's remember who set the area on fire. And then, of course, the defense minister from Russia also pointed out, he said, international wars of the past decades that have been unleashed by the U.S. thanks to false CIA data in Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya have all been started, continued, and finished with a destroyed economic infrastructure of these states by the U.S. Air Force. And he says, I don't think it's a coincidence that companies that are close to the CIA and the Pentagon have always been among the first to receive contracts to rebuild the damaged infrastructure. So that's one of the key reasons that we see the Washington Post and Barack Obama and the globalist establishment inciting incursions. You're the ones who are doing it. Now, today we saw tweets, actually yesterday we saw tweets from Donald Trump saying that the intel briefings on the so-called Russian hacks were being pushed back to Friday. He said maybe it's because they need more time to build a case. And so this created a lot of discussion on Capitol Hill. A senior intelligence official told NBC News that the meeting was always scheduled for Friday. And it was on New Year's Eve that Trump talked about his doubts about the Russian hack. He said, told pool reporters, I just want them to be sure, because it's a pretty serious charge, and I want them to be sure. If you look at the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that was a disaster, and they were wrong. But see, we're not supposed to remember that the government gave bad intelligence, that the government lied, that the CIA lied to the American public about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We're supposed to forget about that. We're also not supposed to give any credibility to the current U.S. ambassador from Great Britain, who says that he had U.S. sources tell him that it wasn't the Russians, it was them. And we also had a former British ambassador. Don't listen to him either. He said he came to America and was handed information about the DNC by a whistleblower who was a supporter of Bernie and was upset about the crimes of the DNC. And so Donald Trump is saying, hacking is a very hard thing to prove, so it could be somebody else. Of course, we need to always understand that when you go through these hacks, of course, you're going to route it through multiple areas, but the press does not want you to see that. Instead, they come back and they say Trump is siding with Assange over the intelligence community. This is the headline from a story from The Hill. And Trump came out this morning and said Julian Assange said a 14-year-old could have hacked Podesta. This was the interview he had with Sean Hannity. He said, why was the DNC so careless? Also, he said the Russians did not give him the information. Now, today, there was an interview with Paul Ryan. He told a talk show host that he wouldn't say whether or not he thought that Donald Trump should be quoting Julian Assange, but Paul Ryan said that Assange was a sycophant for Russia and that he stole data and he compromised national security. Did Paul Ryan ever say that about Hillary Clinton? Did he talk in strong terms about how Hillary Clinton had compromised U.S. national security with her lax security measures for her own benefit? He says, somebody hacked the DNC. Why did they not have hacking defenses like the RNC, said Donald Trump. Things they did and things like giving questions before a debate to Hillary, a total double standard, media as usual gives them a pass. Yet we have yet another reliable member of the neocon establishment. Senator Tom Cotton comes out in response to Donald Trump and says, I have more faith in intel officers than I do in Julian Assange. We're here in the nation's capital. I have more confidence in these smart and experienced people, the same ones who told us about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that did not exist, okay? Nobody has accused Julian Assange of giving us any false information. We know the U.S. intelligence community gave false information and or the president lied about that. And they go on to say, Cotton says, I know it was the Russians because it's the sort of thing that they would do. Now, Drudge has been hit again with denial of service attack last night. Again, today, I was having difficulty getting on the Drudge report when I looked at it. And of course, he was down for 90 minutes on December the 30th. This second attack came out and you had all these people mocking Matt Drudge and saying, he said it was the government. Why do you think he would say it's the government? For the same reason that Tom Cotton would say, hey, I think the Russians have a motivation to do this. Is Matt Drudge being hacked by the Russians? Isn't it interesting that Tom Cotton and the CIA are not accusing the Russians of hacking Drudge? It would be the government that we're telling the truth about that I think is coming after Matt Drudge. I think he got that exactly right. Meanwhile, WikiLeaks is offering a $20,000 reward to prevent the Obama government from destroying U.S. history. Does that seem over the top? Have they ever done anything like that before? Why, yes, they have. As a matter of fact, if you go back and remember, what did Sandy Berger do? Sandy Berger was the national security advisor for Bill Clinton, and he went into the National Archives and grabbed paper back in the day before we had electronic documents. He started stuffing them into his clothes. He took them out and he destroyed them. He is the poster child at the National Security Archives now for how they should not give somebody who is a well-known celebrity access and bend the rules for them, because he destroyed this and he got away with it. That's the way the Clintons did it before we had electronic documents. And so 10 minutes prior to offering this reward, WikiLeaks tweeted out, urged any system administrators working under Obama to become whistleblowers. They said, system admins, don't let the White House destroy U.S. history again. Copy it now, then send it to WikiLeaks at your leisure. Very important to understand. They've done this in the past. They will do it again in the future.
In case you haven't heard, Infowars has become the most influential media outlet in America. We're making freedom go viral. And now we are proud to announce a new weapon in the epic battle against the globalists. Infowars Prime, where you can watch live high-definition feeds of The Alex Jones Show, plus exclusive insider videos from the Infowars crew and behind-the-scenes action. Go to Infowars.com/app and download today. Infowars Prime is available right now for your iPhone or Android. You will have access to exclusive videos that you can't see anywhere else. And that means live coverage of events and breaking news on location as it happens. You can also take advantage of amazing deals from the Infowars store that are only available for Infowars Prime subscribers. That's Infowars Prime at Infowars.com/app. And if you can hear my voice, you are the resistance.